She told me I was the last thing she should want. But somehow, she couldn't stop herself. It all began with a moment so subtle, it almost slipped past me unnoticed. She was there, effortlessly poised, carrying an air of quiet confidence that somehow felt both distant and inviting. I remember the first time I saw her, standing by the window of that small cafe, where the light caught the soft lines of her face just right. She wasn't loud or demanding attention. Instead, she carried herself with a grace that made the world seem to slow down around her. There was something in her presence that didn't fit the usual script. She looked like she belonged in a different chapter of life, a chapter that had known laughter and loss, strength and vulnerability in equal measure. Her hair, streaked with hints of silver, framed a face that spoke of experience but also of kindness. It was her eyes, though, that caught me most, deep, warm, and steady. They held stories, secrets maybe, but in that first glance, there was an unmistakable flicker of something more, a silent recognition, perhaps, or a question waiting to be asked. Our first exchange was brief, an accidental brush of hands as she reached for the same book I had my eye on, or the way she smiled when our eyes met across the crowded room. Her voice was soft but clear, the kind that felt like a gentle invitation rather than a demand. "I think you have good taste," she said, handing me the book with a delicate touch. That moment, her fingers lightly resting against mine, sent an unexpected ripple through me, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. Around us, the cafe buzzed with the low murmur of conversations, the clink of cups, and the scent of freshly ground coffee beans. Yet in that small space between us, everything else seemed to fade into a muted background hum. I was suddenly aware of the way my heart beat a little faster, how my palms grew warmer. She looked at me with a quiet curiosity, her lips curving into a smile that held a touch of vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. In those seconds, unspoken and fleeting, a tension began to weave itself between us, delicate, fragile, but undeniably real. I knew there was a boundary there, one defined not by words, but by the subtle lines of age, experience, and the unspoken rules that kept people like us apart. She seemed to sense it too. Yet, in that moment, neither of us moved away. Instead, we lingered just a heartbeat longer, caught in the silent pull of something neither of us could name yet. As I walked away, the echo of her presence stayed with me. The soft weight of that brief touch, the gentle warmth of her smile. Something inside me shifted, a quiet awakening to the possibility that this encounter might not be just a passing moment, but the beginning of a slow, unexpected story. After that first quiet meeting, our paths began to cross more often, almost as if fate was quietly nudging us closer. She was a constant presence in the periphery of my days, at the corner bookstore, in the soft-lit corridors of the office, or simply passing by in the park during my evening walks. Yet, each encounter was wrapped in hesitation, like a dance where neither of us was quite sure of the steps, but unwilling to step away. Our conversations remained careful and light, touching only on safe topics, the weather, a shared favorite author, or a fleeting comment about the day's news. But beneath the surface of these simple exchanges, there was an unspoken language growing between us. It was in the way her eyes would catch mine a moment longer than necessary, a flicker of something vulnerable hiding behind her calm exterior. I noticed the small things, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the quiet shift of her posture when I entered the room, the almost imperceptible pause before she spoke, as if weighing each word. There was a subtle electricity in those silences, the kind that doesn't scream for attention, but hums softly just beneath the skin. Sometimes, as we reached for the same file or passed documents back and forth, our fingers would brush, light, accidental, but charged. The warmth of her skin against mine lingered long after the touch, a quiet reminder that something was stirring beneath the surface. I found myself watching her more closely, trying to read the layers beneath her composed face. She carried herself with a confidence that came from years of experience, but occasionally her eyes betrayed a flicker of hesitation, like a whispered secret she wasn't quite ready to share. There was an unspoken tension between caution and desire, a delicate balance that made every glance feel weighty and every smile seem like a small victory. The world around us moved on, indifferent to the growing connection we were both too afraid to name. I could sense her internal struggle, her awareness of the differences between us, not just in age but in the lives we had lived. I understood that this wasn't just about attraction. It was about the fear of breaking unwritten rules and stepping into a space that felt uncertain, maybe even forbidden. Yet despite the hesitation, there was a magnetic pull I couldn't ignore. I felt the quiet hope in her lingering looks, the softness in the way she listened when I spoke, the subtle way her presence seemed to fill the room. And beneath it all, a shared yearning to bridge the gap that stood between us, not with bold declarations or rushed confessions, but through moments like these, fragile, tentative, and full of unspoken promise. In those early days, nothing was certain except the slow, steady rhythm of something growing, an unspoken curiosity that neither of us dared to voice but couldn't deny. It was in the quiet spaces between words, in the soft glances, and in the delicate dance of closeness and distance that began to define us. There was a certain kind of magic in that unexpected afternoon when the world seemed to pause just for us. It was the kind of moment that comes quietly, unannounced, and yet leaves a lasting imprint on the heart. The sky had grown heavy with clouds, and rain began to fall softly, each drop tapping against the window like a gentle reminder to slow down. We found ourselves alone, waiting out the storm in the small, dimly lit lobby of the office building. The usual buzz of hurried footsteps and ringing phones had faded away, replaced by a calm stillness that wrapped around us like a fragile cocoon. She sat across from me, her eyes reflecting the muted light, and for the first time, our silence wasn't filled with hesitation, but with an unspoken understanding. The earlier nervousness had softened into something warmer, something that allowed her to speak with a voice that was low and almost trembling. "I shouldn't want you," she said, her words barely more than a whisper. It wasn't a confession born of recklessness, but one tinged with vulnerability, honesty, and the weight of years lived with careful boundaries. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let her words settle between us like a delicate thread weaving a new connection. My gaze softened as I reached out, letting my hand hover gently near hers before finally bridging the small gap. When my fingers touched hers, it wasn't a demand or a claim, just a quiet offering of presence and steady reassurance. Her skin was cool but softened by the warmth of the room, and the slight tremble in her fingers told me how much this simple contact meant. In that shared moment, there was a sense of two worlds touching, her composed, guarded life meeting my youthful sincerity and quiet hope. The rain drummed softly on the glass, and the faint scent of her perfume mingled with the damp air, wrapping around us like a gentle embrace. She leaned in just slightly, her cheek resting lightly against my arm, and I felt the subtle rise and fall of her breath, steady but fragile. We didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, we allowed it to deepen, holding space for the emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. There was no need for grand declarations or hurried promises, just the raw honesty of a shared moment, fragile and real. I could see the conflict flickering in her eyes, the fear of what this meant, the risk of breaking the quiet order of her life, but also the undeniable pull towards something new. This moment marked the first time the walls between us felt less like barriers and more like something that could be gently lowered piece by piece. The slow burn of desire and connection was no longer hidden in fleeting glances or accidental touches. It had found a voice in whispered truths and the warmth of a hand held just a little longer than before. As the rain eased and the world outside blurred behind the glass, I realized this was more than a chance encounter. It was the beginning of a story neither of us had planned but both couldn't walk away from. A story that, despite the odds, promised something beautiful and unexpected. There was a moment, a small, seemingly insignificant gesture, that changed everything without a word being spoken. It happened on a day like many others, caught somewhere between the routine and the unexpected. The kind of day when the air is thick with tension, but no one can quite say why. We were sitting close, maybe too close, in a quiet corner of a busy cafe. The low hum of conversation, the soft clink of cups and plates, and the faint scent of roasted coffee beans created a comforting backdrop for what was about to unfold. I remember how the afternoon sunlight filtered through the window, casting warm golden hues over her hair, softening the lines of her face in a way that made her look almost ethereal. She laughed at something I said, an honest, unguarded laugh that made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't expecting. And then, without thinking, my hand brushed lightly against her arm as I reached for my cup. The touch was deliberate yet tentative, a question rather than a statement. It was the kind of touch that lingers in the memory because it's loaded with meaning but wrapped in softness. The warmth of her skin beneath my fingertips was immediate and electric, sending a subtle thrill through me. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers found mine, resting gently on my palm for a heartbeat longer than necessary. That simple act spoke volumes, a silent permission, a fragile acceptance. In that instant, everything else, the noise, the other people, the cautious whispers in our minds, seemed to fall away. Time slowed, and the space between us shrank until it felt as if we were the only two people in the world. The warmth of her touch was grounding, a quiet reassurance amid the whirlwind of emotions that had been building between us. Her eyes met mine, soft and searching, filled with a mix of hesitation and desire. It was a look that acknowledged the invisible lines we were crossing, the age gap, the social expectations, the doubts and fears that clung like shadows. But more than that, it was a look of trust, a silent promise that, whatever this was becoming, we would navigate it together, carefully and respectfully. Around us, the cafe buzzed on, oblivious to the small revolution taking place in the space between our hands. The faint melody of a song playing in the background seemed to echo the rhythm of our breathing, slow and steady, but charged with something new. The gentle pressure of her fingers against mine was a lifeline, a tether to a moment that was both fragile and profound. That touch was more than just skin against skin. It was the first step across a boundary that neither of us dared to name aloud, but both felt deeply. It marked the beginning of a deeper connection, one built not on hurried declarations or reckless passion, but on quiet moments of courage and vulnerability. In that soft contact, the story began to change. The slow-burning tension shifted into something tangible, a delicate bridge between two hearts learning to beat in sync despite the world's expectations. It was a moment I would replay in my mind many times, a whispered memory of the first time we truly touched. The quiet moments between us grew heavier, weighted not only by the tenderness of our connection, but by the storm raging quietly within her. I could see it in the way her smile faltered sometimes, the quick glances that seemed to search the room for answers she couldn't find. The hesitation was no longer just about us. It was about everything that stood outside our bubble. Society's unspoken rules, the whispers of judgment, and the self-imposed boundaries that life had taught her to respect. She was a woman who carried her confidence like armor, but beneath it lay a fragile heart wrestling with doubt. I sensed the struggle every time she looked away when I reached for her hand, or when her fingers trembled just before she pulled back. It was clear that the age gap between us wasn't just a number. It was a chasm filled with expectations, fears, and the weight of what others might think. The world outside our moments together didn't pause. It watched, judged, and sometimes whispered. I wanted to reach out and soothe those worries, to tell her that I saw her for who she truly was beyond any societal lens. But I also knew that patience was the only thing that could bridge this divide. So I stayed quiet, letting her set the pace, offering steady understanding without pressure. I learned to listen to what she said and what she didn't say. The pauses, the silences heavy with meaning, the cracks in her composed exterior. One evening, As we sat side by side in the fading light of a park bench, she finally voiced the fears that had been swirling inside her. What if people don't understand? What if I'm just chasing something I shouldn't? Her voice was fragile, raw, an unguarded confession that echoed the uncertainty I felt too, but had buried beneath hopeful longing. I reached out and gently took her hand in mine, feeling the warmth and tremble that matched my own. I don't have all the answers, I said softly, but I know that what we have, it's real. It's worth the risk. My words weren't meant to erase her fears, but to acknowledge them, to let her know that she wasn't alone in facing this. The conflict within her was a dance between heart and mind, a pull towards something new and beautiful, and the caution taught by years of experience. She feared losing herself in something uncertain, yet she couldn't deny the quiet flame that had been kindled. Every glance we shared, every touch we allowed, became a testament to that fragile hope. Even in moments of doubt, I saw her strength, the way she kept showing up, the courage it took to admit her feelings despite the inner turmoil. It was a reminder that love, especially a slow-burning one, isn't just about passion, but about the quiet battles fought behind closed doors. This part of our story was not filled with dramatic confrontations or external opposition, but with the intimate, often unseen struggle of two hearts learning to navigate the complexity of desire, judgment, and hope. It was messy, tender, and profoundly human. And through it all, the slow but steady thread of connection between us remained unbroken, waiting for the moment when fear would give way to acceptance and hesitation would blossom into trust. The moment came quietly, without fanfare, like a fragile secret finally stepping into the light. It was late evening, the kind of hour when the world softens and shadows grow long, wrapping everything in a gentle hush. We sat close on a weathered park bench, the sky above painted with muted hues of dusk. Around us, the faint rustle of leaves and distant sounds of a city winding down formed a serene backdrop for what felt like a turning point. She had been unusually still, her fingers nervously twisting a scarf around her wrist. I could feel the tension in her, the invisible wall she'd been guarding slowly beginning to crumble. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath, trembling with honesty and vulnerability. "I shouldn't want you," she admitted, eyes downcast, "but I can't stop myself." Those words hung between us like a delicate thread, fragile but unbreakable. It was the kind of confession that wasn't made lightly, a quiet surrender to feelings she'd tried to deny, to a truth that had been growing steadily beneath layers of doubt and fear. I reached out instinctively, my hand brushing hers with a tenderness that spoke louder than any words could. The warmth of her skin beneath my fingers was a steady pulse, grounding us both in the reality of this moment. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet mine, her eyes shimmering with a mix of relief and uncertainty. There was no need for elaborate promises or declarations. This was something deeper, quieter, and infinitely more profound. It was the start of trust, of opening hearts with a gentleness that acknowledged all the risks and fears, but chose hope anyway. I drew her closer, wrapping my arms around her waist in a hug that was soft and steady, a shelter from the whirlwind of emotions that had been swirling inside her. Her head rested lightly against my chest, and I could feel the steady beat of her heart, a rhythmic echo that matched my own. For a moment, time seemed to fold inward, holding us in a space where nothing else mattered but the warmth and presence of each other. In that embrace, there was an unspoken promise, not of perfection or certainty, but of patience, respect, and the willingness to face whatever lay ahead together. It was a quiet reassurance that, despite the challenges and fears, this connection was real and worth nurturing. Around us, the world continued its slow dance, streetlights flickering on, the soft murmur of distant conversations. But inside this small bubble, everything was calm and full of possibility. Her fingers curled gently around mine, a silent affirmation of the fragile hope blossoming between us. This quiet confession marked the turning point in our story, the moment when hidden desires found the courage to breathe openly and the walls of hesitation began to fall. It was a tender victory over doubt, a heartfelt step towards something neither of us had expected, but both had longed for. The slow burn that had simmered beneath every glance, every touch, had finally found its voice in a whisper, soft, sincere, and impossibly real. The night had settled softly around us, a gentle quietness that felt like a world holding its breath just for this moment. We walked side by side along the familiar streets, the glow of streetlights casting warm pools of light on the pavement, painting the scene with a golden hue. The cool evening air wrapped around us like a soft shawl, mixing with the subtle warmth that radiated between our clasped hands. There was no need for words now. We had said what needed to be said, honest, fragile confessions that had opened the door to something neither of us could have predicted. Our connection was no longer a secret or a tentative hope, but a steady presence, quietly celebrated in the space between our steps and the gentle squeeze of fingers intertwined. She glanced up at me, a smile soft and genuine playing at the corners of her lips, eyes bright with a light I had come to know as hope. The hesitation, the fear that had once clouded her gaze, had softened into something new, a calm certainty born of trust and shared vulnerability. In that look, I saw the story of us, the slow burn of desire, the quiet battles with doubt, and the beautiful risk of stepping into the unknown together. We paused beneath an old oak tree, its branches stretching wide like protective arms. The world felt still, suspended between moments. I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face with a touch as gentle as a whisper. Her skin was warm beneath my fingertips, and the softness of that small gesture carried a lifetime of unspoken affection. She leaned into the touch, her cheek resting briefly against my hand, and I could feel the steady beat of her heart beneath my palm. It was a silent conversation, a promise spoken without words, a testament to the journey we had taken. The age gap that once seemed like an invisible barrier had transformed into a bridge, connecting two hearts ready to walk forward together. There was an ease now in our closeness, a natural rhythm to the way we moved and breathed as one. No longer bound by the shadows of doubt or the weight of external judgment, we allowed ourselves to simply be, to exist in this new chapter filled with quiet joy and the thrill of discovery. As we continued walking, the city lights twinkled around us like scattered stars, each one a small celebration of the courage it took to follow a path less certain but deeply wanted. The soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant laughter of passers-by, the faint hum of life all blended into a melody that matched the steady beat of our hearts. This was more than just a beginning. It was a promise to nurture what had blossomed between us with patience, respect, and unwavering care. The slow burn romance that had simmered beneath every glance and touch had finally found its home. A warm, honest love that embraced the beauty of imperfection and the power of connection. In her eyes, I saw not just desire but a deep, abiding affection that defied expectations and quietly rewrote the story we thought we knew. Together, we stepped into the night, not as two separate worlds, but as one, ready to face whatever came next with open hearts and intertwined hands.